We've been seeing so much bad news out there. Everything we hear about is about the economy and how bad it is. But I want to talk about your personal economy, because I think what we have to do is we have to differentiate between the two.
Welcome to the Market Call Show, where we discuss what's happening in the markets and the impact on your investments. Tune in every Thursday on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to the Market Call Show. This is Llanes. I am the founder of WealthNet Investments. Today we have an interesting topic and I'm really excited about diving in, so let's get going. Hi, Llanes here. I'm going to be starting a new series this summer, and we call it the Summer Short, and it's about your personal economy. So it's the Summer Shorts about your personal economy. The reason why I want to talk about this is because we have been seeing so much bad news out there. Everything we hear about is about the economy and how bad it is. But I want to talk about your personal economy, because I think what we have to do is we have to differentiate between the two. And I didn't come up with this idea, actually. I'll tell you a little quick story. I had a conversation with Jeffrey Gitomer. Now, Jeffrey Gitomer is an author of the Sales Bible, the Little Red Book of Selling, the Little Green Book of Getting Your Way, all about persuasion, the Little Gold Book of the Yes Attitude, and Getting Shit Done. And he's had a pretty big impact on me. And we were talking about basically what people are seeing right now in the economy. And he said, you know what? Every single person must decide, are you going to concern yourself about the economy, or are you going to concern yourself about your personal economy? Each person must decide. And it got me thinking about how important that really is, because our entire world, in my business, I own an investment company called WealthNet Investments, is to help people decipher their personal economy. Because every day we must concern ourselves as investors with the general economy, because it affects investments in certain ways. But what makes the biggest impact on your situation is whether or not you're taking care of your own personal economy. So I'm actually going to break this down into 5 different summer shorts. And we're going to talk about several different things. The first topic I'm going to talk about is deciphering what's important. So it's really interesting. When I was young, and this was back in the 80s, this is in the around 85, there was a recording engineer by the name of Bubba Perrone. Now, he worked in a really nice studio in Texas, and he worked with a lot of different artists, but one artist he was working with was a guy named Michael Morales, who is a Grammy Award-winning artist. He was signed with Polygram, and well, it was really neat because I was able to take a recording class to learn how to do really high-quality recording to make records. And we were spending a ton of time, painstaking amount of time, learning about the signal-to-noise ratio. Now, if you're an electrical engineer or if you're somebody who's interested in audio, you know what signal-to-noise is. It's kind of a ratio. You want to dissect whenever you're recording something and you want to have a pure sound and you want to have clarity, you need to dissect what is noise, that unwanted disturbance in the electrical signal, versus what is the meaningful input that you want to hear. And you want to hear it because it's pleasing to the ear. Well, that same concept, I think, is really important for people right now, because we're in the midst of a situation where there's going to be tons of noise. And the noise is happening for a few different reasons. The first reason is we have an election coming up. And as we approach the election cycle, the midterm election cycle, that generally increases the noise dramatically. The second reason why we have so much noise is that we have a situation right now structurally where the sources of our information are so many, and we have certain dynamics within the media industry that is creating, shall I say, disinformation. And it's hard to know what is signal and what is noise. And in this particular series, I'm going to actually show you some ways to be able to tell the difference between that signal and the noise, and how you can find out what's meaningful input for your situation, your personal economy, versus the noise, which could actually derail you.
If you worry about your investments, need to make complex financial decisions, or pay unnecessary taxes, the lack of proper financial planning and investing may already be costing you a great deal. When you are ready to turn your peace of wealth into peace of mind, go to wealthnetinvest.com and click on the schedule a call button to talk to us and get a free consultation today.
So I want to talk a little bit about psychology. Now, my team has told me not to talk too much about psychology, but I can't help myself because psychology really drives decisions in many ways, and people make a lot of their worst choices because of the psychology. So right now, you may know this, you may not know this, over 1 in 5 or around 1 in 5 people today have some form of anxiety or depression. And the pandemic, if you will, has really accelerated that because we've been isolated. We've reconditioned ourselves to not be able to deal effectively with human beings on a face-to-face basis. We've had a lot of things that have pushed us and pulled us in different directions, and we've actually been a captive audience to the news media. And this has created anxiety. I was talking to my wife this morning, and I was talking about the cell phone. I remember when I was doing my MBA, it was right as the first cell phone from Apple had come out, the first iPhone. And I worked at the time for a major bank. I was a portfolio manager managing money for this bank. And we were only issued like the Blackberries. And that was the standard back then. And I remember in class, when we first started out in our MBA cohort, this is at the University of Denver, nobody had an iPhone. But then towards the end of the first year, people started getting the iPhone. And then I noticed everybody's head, as more and more people got the iPhone, their heads started going down like this. When we first started, we were all looking at each other. We were engaging. We were writing things down. We were talking. We were in groups. And then slowly, the cohort started looking more and more towards their phones. We took a trip to Brazil, and I saw more and more people with their heads stuck in the phone. At first, I was jealous of that, because they would come up to me and say, hey, look, let me get your email. And then they'd get my email from on their phone, and they'd be typing in with their thumb. And they were a lot smaller than they are now, the very first one. But it made me realize that the whole technology realm has actually been a big part of this, social media and technology. And I want to talk a little bit about the media. The media is a very interesting phenomenon because I was just doing some research on this because I know people know this, but I think it's really important to understand and to reiterate that the media is really hurting us from knowing what is signal versus noise. One of the biggest parts of media is kind of dissecting who is who, like what type of media you're working with. And I think if you start off with that, it could really be helpful. So some people call like Comcast and the big cable news networks, they kind of call that the mainstream media, as well as like the New York Times, your established mainstream media. Well, over the years, what's happened, and the facts are that the ownership of these media companies has gotten more and more concentrated. And if you've studied economics, you know that there's this concept of an oligopoly. And when you have less and less providers in an industry, you get kind of an oligopoly type behavior. And typically what that means, when one particular provider of a product or service in an oligopoly changes what they do, it affects what everybody else does. Media is a little bit different than other oligopolies. For example, in the oil industry, that tends to be an oligopoly type economy or industry, and there tends to be more price collusion. In media, it's a little bit different. You tend to have more differentiation. In other words, when one particular news media takes a stance on something, you tend to have people moving together to have the same message across the board. And then you have other groups that are tending to be wanting to get a different audience and then completely differentiate. And so what's happening is you have this big bifurcation moving further to one side and further to the other in terms of demographics. And then the vast majority of people like you and me, we kind of get lost in the shuffle. And it's no wonder that if you look at the Nielsen ratings, you'll see that the Nielsen ratings show that there's some people don't trust the traditional news media. I was blown away when I saw the statistics. Something like 5%, it ranges, like ABC, only 5% of people trust ABC, 3% the NBC nightly news. Now, most of the cable-oriented news, most of those viewers are actually your ABC, NBC, CBS. In fact, they have more viewers than all of Fox News, MSNBC, etc. Within the MSNBC type or the Fox News type media, they tend to have more concentration. In fact, most of the viewership has been in Fox News, which is very interesting to me because of the top 20, I was just looking at the Nielsen ratings, of the top 20, 15 of the top 20 shows in that space are all run by Fox News. There is this bifurcation that's happening. But the big story, I think, is that you have all these other alternative media sources. That's the real story, if you ask me. The real story is people are watching podcasts. They're listening to Joe Rogan. They're going to listening to the Tomcast. They're going to Google. Google's numbers are enormous, right? YouTube is astronomical. So that's really what's happening. You also have Facebook and Instagram and Disney, so you have this dispersion of news. And one of the things that happens when you have an oligopoly, and this is really important to understand, is you tend to lose accountability to the public. So we've lost some journalistic freedoms. There's been interference, well-documented interference, especially like in the New York Times, for example. You see the interference that's happening with journalism, and you're seeing the bifurcation. So how is one to know what is real, what is signal, and what is noise? That's what I'm going to be talking about in this series. And not only am I going to be talking about that, I'm also going to be talking about what can you do to understand your personal economy, not the economy, but your personal economy, and make better, smart investment choices and financial planning choices. So this is my first short, number 1, and I'm planning on doing a total of 5. So I'm hoping you're having a great summer, and let's talk about being better about deciphering signal to noise in our future episodes. Have a great day.
For the latest episode of The Market Call Show, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Go to marketcallshow.com for all our past episodes and sign up to get alerts for new episodes. If you enjoyed the content of this episode, please leave us a 5-star review and comments. The information in this podcast is informational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision. WealthNet Investments is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where WealthNet Investments and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure.